Well, in light of the recent Supreme Court decision to protect the constitutional right of gays to marry, I think we needed to say a couple things to our church family and maybe to anyone else that would be interested. So that's what we're doing here this afternoon. I do. I'm not an expert in first century Roman culture. You did have there a plethora of religious ideas, pagan ideas, philosophical ideas that all were amalgamated, this kind of syncretistic. And if there's anything about our culture, it is more spiritual without being Christian. So I think that we are in the same place as the first century, inasmuch as that we're no longer the dominant religious idea. I think we're still sort of culturally Christian to some degree. A lot of our institutions and ideas, they're remnants of this, but I think that's very quickly fading away. And we're becoming more pluralistic, you might say, in our philosophical and religious views. And therefore, Christianity has an opportunity to distinguish itself if people are willing to live out a more radical Christian life and not just live as cultural Christians or church Christians, but true Christians that love and risk for the people around us. So I see opportunity in this. I also see danger because the early church believers were not persecuted because they were Christians. They were persecuted because they said Jesus is the only Lord. And this is the situation we're in right now. Well, we're not going to be persecuted because we're religious. If we're going to be persecuted, it's because we stand against the prevailing powers of the current culture, the government, cultural institutions, the leading indicators of where culture is going. We stand against them. And because we do that, there'll be more and more persecution. We're not sure what form that will take. I would think it would come in the form of oppression and lawsuits. Eventually, some people would be, let's say, arrested. There will be perhaps the taking away of tax-exempt status. I mean, all these things are out there, I think, waiting to happen. And yet, for some reason, I think that God is in the middle of this. He's going to be glorified because as culture implodes, Christians have often come back to help rebuild it. And that may not be my generation, but it may be in the ones to come. And we'll just ask God to give us grace to endure all that if that is indeed the case. I think there's a part of that seems hypocritical. I would agree that if we're not living out the virtues and values that we espouse, then we might as well give way and let someone else have a crack at it because maybe they can do it better. On the other hand, I think we have to not fall victim to that argument lock, stock, and barrel, and it's for this reason. The standard of truth isn't my ability to live it out. The standard of truth is God's word, regardless of how I react to it. So while we're hypocritical and not living up to it, we can't take the next step and say, therefore, the truth itself is wrong and needs to be discarded. That would be a very subtle argument against us, but if you go there, I think you're making a huge mistake because the standard of ultimate veracity of any enterprise or institution or belief or idea is not my ability to be consistent. It's God's ability to deliver what He knows is true and what He has ordained as true from the beginning of time. So this is always the standard. It's just up to us to try to live it out. And I do grieve over the inconsistency and the hypocrisy. I want to start in my own life, in my own church, in my own heart, and with the people around me, our own leadership team, and say, God, we have sinned and we have failed to live up to the things that you said we should do. I think we have to be careful that we're not going to react to that as though that's the most important thing. I mean, I don't know of anybody that I know that wants to be called a bigot or hateful. This is the label that's attached to us, but you have to recognize that Christians have always been labeled as sort of deviant members of society. I think back in the first century church, they were labeled as cannibals because of a misconception of the Christians' version of the Lord's Supper. So Christians have been called all kinds of things, and for us to try to finesse our way to a place of acceptability, I think, is being pretty naive. I think that the scriptures tell us that by living a certain type of life, we might silence the ignorance of foolish men. Whether we're able to do that or not is sort of up to God. But as we become increasingly marginalized in our culture, I just think our mission is to continue to love, because we're not the ones that are going to convince the culture of anything. We're not the ones that are able to convert the culture. We're not the ones to stand against it and say, you need to do it our way. All we're able to do in our weakness is to represent the grace of God in the world. So this is God's business. It's His work. It's His gospel. And it's His kingdom. And we're just called to enter into that as faithfully as we can in our brokenness and in our insufficiency. And I believe He can use us, because His plan for the world is far bigger than the Supreme Court of the United States of America, the current cultural condition, the state of the church. His plan for the world is way beyond this. We still have an opportunity to be part of it, and let's take advantage of that for His glory.